Hi mums and dads, I'm Dr. Nelu SIMONSZ. I'm a pediatric doctor and I'm here to chat about some important children's health topics. On today's episode of Kids Health, I'll be talking to cultural diversity advocate Alicia Vrajlal about why cultural diversity in the media is important for children. And then we have a really exciting discussion about gender diversity, around issues that may arise as children explore their sense of identity. But first, I'd like to chat a bit about positive role modelling for children at home. It has been a really tough year for everyone. With the pandemic, lockdown, working from home, businesses being closed, families, parents and children alike have been stretched. And this has made us more aware of some of the issues that have been coming up. I just wanted to say that as a whole, everyone has done a really brilliant job trying to get through to the other side of this. And I hope that there are some take-home messages from this time that we've had. For me, it's things like kindness. We could always do with more kindness in the world. A small act of paying it forward can really make a difference to someone else. And one thing that is really important for children to see at home is how we accept other people's differences, whether it be skin colour, size, their interests. How we respond to difference is how our children will also respond. Now I will be chatting to the amazing Alicia Vrajlal. Alicia has a background in accounting and journalism, has worked at Yahoo, Daily Mail Online, and currently holds the coveted role of editor at HUFFPOST Australia. Alicia's passion lies in cultural diversity and representation in the media. She is a spokesperson on national television on this topic, and today she'll be chatting to us about how cultural diversity in the media can impact children. Alicia, I am so thrilled to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here.
So can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So I'm an accounting and journalism graduate. I am the editor at HuffPost Australia, very, very passionate about cultural diversity and representation. You know, coming from a Fijian Indian background, the daughter of immigrants that came to Australia in the 1980s. You know, I've been born and raised in Sydney my whole life. And, you know, I've gone through the motions myself of growing up here and feeling like the other. So I've used those personal experiences and what I would like to see be changed to fuel my journalism and what I write about. And that's also led to my own blog, Draw Your Box, which also, you know, explores identity and representation and all of those sorts of topics as well.
What are your thoughts on how cultural representation may impact children?
I think cultural representation can definitely impact children, and that's why it's so important we're having this conversation. I think kids can make judgments so quickly. It's those really fundamental, pivotal years. When you're watching something on TV, and especially with kids, they are picking things up. They're in that process of development. They are learning things, and I truly believe, you know, racism especially is a taught thing. You're not born racist. So what we see on TV or film or in, you know, books or here in music makes such a difference. So if kids are seeing an ethnic minority being portrayed a certain way, so I guess this is not just about there being more ethnic minorities on screen, but then also in terms of how they're being represented. If they're being represented a certain way, then kids will soon be able to, you know, if they've watched that stereotype enough times, you'll ask them, who's the princess? Who's the fairy godmother? Who's the person that goes to jail or is always the bad guy kind of thing? And they'll develop these judgments and they'll develop that sort of worldview. And that can be problematic in ways if it's too negative. And I think the other side of it, which is why I believe cultural diversity and representation for kids is so important, is because, you know, it comes back a bit to my lived experiences. You want to have that role model and someone you can look up to, and you want to be represented, you want to be shown, you want to be told that you're normal. For myself, growing up in Australia, I remember it was just Trisha Goddard on Play School and Indira Naidoo on the news, who were the brown people, you know, that I felt like I could see. And in my early 20s, when I was going into the media, I remember colouring my hair, trying to look culturally ambiguous, going for like caramel or a blonde, trying to look less Indian to get a career in the media, because that's what I thought, you needed to be. I didn't see enough people that had brown skin or were particularly South Asian even that looked like me. Now, I think it doesn't matter whether a kid wants to go into the media or not. Role models are so important in, whatever field you go into, and who you see on TV, whether it's characters in a TV show. You want to watch your favorite soap, if we look at the mainstreams like Home and Away or Neighbours, and you want that at Summer Bay High, that there is that, Asian kid or someone, because when you go to school, you are that Asian kid.
Yeah, I think it's more sort of the smaller networks that are starting to embrace it, but I still feel like the big networks aren't quite embracing that. What do you think?
I agree with that, and I think Australia is significantly behind the US, the UK, relatively recent Hollywood films, Black Panther, A Wrinkle in Time. They show the power of diversity and how important representation is. If we're talking in terms of bigger powerhouses internationally, Netflix and Stan, but locally, I think, the ABC and the SBS probably are the places that have the most cultural diversity in terms of children's programming. It's a thing that's evolving, but it's definitely the place where it should be happening the most, I think. And, yourself as a mother, you probably know better than me how important it is. But I've spoken to other parents who've said, they're really trying to be super conscious of that. And they don't want to, if it doesn't have an inclusive message, not letting my kid watch that.
Yeah, and I think the more people that do that, the more the message will get out there about how important it is. I'm going to extrapolate a bit about what we've been talking about. Now, I see a lot of the other end of bullying in kids. So kids that come into emergency and children with mental health disorders, primarily from bullying. Do you think that promoting inclusion and diversity in the media might have that flow-on effect of helping with bullying and reducing that sort of racism and issues like that in the schoolyard?
I think definitely promoting more cultural diversity and representation in the media can have a positive impact in terms of hopefully reducing some bullying, because I think kids replicate often the notions and the ideas and the behavior that they see from the media that they consume. And I think in this time and age, media is everywhere. Everyone has a screen, has a little screen from a young age, or they see things, advertisements or whatnot. If they are consuming media that is portraying a negative stereotype, or is perhaps rather, which is the case in Australia a lot of the time, whitewashed, they will see other ethnic groups or minority groups as less than or other, as second-class citizens. And so it's important for these minorities to be seen, heard, and understood. I know I was bullied, myself in primary school. It was, now I think about it, it was that I had a mustache, and it's the little things like that can add up. South Asian people have darker hair. I was in a sea of all my friends were white. So little things like that can make such a difference. And I just remember like the shows, whatever we watched, didn't have any cultural diversity. So in a way, you understand sort of how those kids reacted, because the exposure perhaps just wasn't there. I think so many of us, in my generation are grappling with our identity as it is. There's self-esteem issues and trying to figure out who we are. So if this incoming generation and the next generations already have that fantastic foundation in place, their self-esteem will flourish, and hopefully it'll also educate other kids.
Oh, I love your messaging. Thank you so much, Alicia. That's such great food for thought, and we just need to keep getting this message out there. Where can our viewers find you?
The viewers can find me on my social media. So Twitter and Facebook is at Leeshiev, LEESHIEV. And I'm also writing across HUFFPOST Australia on a daily basis. So yeah, always happy to connect with people. Would love to hear your thoughts, and, thank you so much for having me on. I think this is a really important conversation. You're doing some amazing work, and looking forward to hearing the feedback and what happens next.
Thank you so much. I'm sure this conversation will resonate with a lot of our viewers. So thank you for chatting about it.
My pleasure, and thanks again.
Gender identity is a complex issue. It's more understood now, and there are a lot of services available. So how does it come about? Most children are assigned a gender from birth based on their physical characteristics. And around the age of 2 to 3, they start to express their gender identity. Now, for most children, it feels normal and right, but for others, it can be quite distressing. Children may not be able to articulate this, they may not even know exactly what's going on themselves, or they might have an idea and not be sure how to express it. As a parent, it can be really hard to know exactly what's going on, and it can be hard to know what to do next. So starting off by speaking to a GP or seeking supports can be a good place to begin, and of course, chatting to your child when they feel ready. There is an increasing number of children who struggle with gender identity, and today we have a very special panel joining us to talk about this important topic. Vanessa Leongue is a clinical psychologist specialising in child and adolescent mental health. And here to share their experiences with us, we have T. Butler, a non-binary radio presenter and content creator, and Beth Blu, a non-binary writer with a background in childhood education. Thank you all so much for joining us today. So Vanessa, let's start with you. Now, there's a lot of terminology around this topic. As a start, can you please explain what transgender or gender diverse means?
Yeah, so the definition does range a little bit depending on where you read up on it, but generally gender diverse and transgender refers to when someone identifies as a gender that's different to what they were assigned to at birth and what society may think they may refer themselves to. So gender diverse is quite an umbrella term as well.
Okay, so what about gender dysphoria?
So gender dysphoria is pretty much a label that is used for children, young people and adults who identify themselves as a gender that's different to what they were assigned to at birth, and it must also have an and also feel quite distressed by this difference. There's quite a list of criteria to meet as well before you can use that diagnosis.
So is that a diagnosis that you work with in a psychology setting?
Yeah, so well, often a lot of the young people I work with, they come to me and they already have that diagnosis, that may be from who they've seen previously. But I generally work with the young person with whatever they want to work on rather than what label they've been given.
T, do you mind explaining to us what it means when you say you identify as non-binary?
Yeah, so as non-binary, I'm somewhere between being male and female. I strongly identify on the female side, as you may or may not be able to tell. But I like to go by non-binary just because it just feels closer to how I see myself inside. Non-binary is a term that acknowledges that there is a spectrum between male and female. And yeah, I might sit up towards the female end of that spectrum, but I'm definitely moving around in that space.
So does it change over time, how you identify?
I feel like it's more in terms of the intensity with which I would feel a certain way. For me, it's like if faced with the choice, I would prefer she, her over he, him. But I definitely feel closer to the middle. If it was if the middle was 5 out of 10, I'd say maybe a 7 or an 8. I sometimes describe myself as like girl ? That's kind of how I feel about it.
Thank you. So Beth, is this similar for you as well?
In a way, yes. I think I'm much closer to where T was at the start of their journey, in that I am more in the middle than on either of the binaries. And I don't think I'm going to go to either of the binaries. In fact, I'd probably move towards a more agender experience, so something that is completely outside the binary. My main thing is I feel like a person. I don't identify with either of the binaries. I don't want to be treated as either of the binaries. And I just want to be treated as a person, because that's what I feel like. And it can be really affirming to some people to be treated as one of the binaries, but just not for me.
So T, how did your friends and family react about finding out about your gender?
They handled it quite well. So at first, rather than coming out, I invited some friends in rather than just being a la la la, this is all of what I'm feeling. I picked a few trusted friends who I thought would take it well and shared it with them first. And yeah, they did take it really well. And it was their encouragement that gave me the confidence to end up coming out a few months later. My family took it really well as well. There's still, like, occasionally they'll use the wrong pronouns, but it's pretty rare that it happens now. Generally, my extended family, once I kind of posted on Facebook and changed my name on there, they worked it out pretty quickly. And then that meant I didn't have to explain it to everyone. So no awkward Christmases. It was excellent.
Oh, so it sounds like you've had a really nice, pleasant experience in your coming out, that's really great. Beth, how have your relationships changed through this process?
My relationships have really strengthened once I came out. So, because I'm not that good at actor. So people knew something was wrong and they didn't know what was going on. So it felt really like it lacked a genuineness in a lot of my relationships until I came out and people were like, oh, so that's it. That's what you haven't been saying. So I was able to really deepen my friendships. So I was able to make much better connections and I was able to surround myself with people who really respected me. So it's been quite lovely.
Oh, so you've had a similar, really pleasant experience. That's just really heartwarming to hear, actually, because I think a lot of people are often scared about this topic in this area. So I think it's really nice to hear from people who've had wonderful experiences around it. I'm just wondering on your thoughts, Beth, on how schools might be able to support gender diverse students.
Basically, what schools could really focus on is eliminating or reducing gender segregation as part of the curriculum. Whether that be in PE, really in analysing whether you do need to separate genders in that environment, because oftentimes you don't. Or if you just want to split a class in two really efficiently, you can just split it down the middle. You don't need to literally go boys here, girls here. You're creating an uncomfortable environment for gender diverse people, even before they know they're gender diverse. So even if you have an environment where you think everyone's cis, they're probably not. They don't know it yet, or you don't know it yet. Discussing trans issues in classrooms would be fantastic just for spreading education and awareness and acceptance. So especially in science classes, it would be great if people knew the difference between sex and gender, and that would really help with a general better understanding of what being trans is. There's things like gender neutral bathroom options that schools can implement. And gender pick and mix if they are a uniform school. So like let people choose if they want to wear skirts or pants. I think another thing which would be really great, I went to a few religious schools and it would have been great to see people who were gender diverse but also retain their faith. It doesn't matter what religion you are, there will be an activist who's trans and is part of that religion that you could probably bring in to talk to people and just start embracing them as part of your community.
Great. So I think it's a lot about sort of breaking down the barriers and the cultural norms and what society sees is the way it should be. And you're right, I think starting at school and starting when kids are young is really the best way to start changing that shift in society. So thanks for sharing that. T, do you have any advice for young people around coming out safely?
First of all, you don't have to come out until you're comfortable to, would be the big one that I would say. And I mentioned earlier that idea of inviting in. You don't have to come out to everyone and make it a huge emotionally taxing thing for you. You can come out whenever you're ready, and in the interim you might only come out to just a few select people who you trust. I know that there are many families who have kids who think they might be trans and they say, okay, well maybe let's just for the weekend, let's try using a different name and using some different pronouns, and you can just test it out and see how you feel. And it really creates a beautiful safe space for them to be able to see if it is what's right for them. Then maybe at the end they'll go, actually no, it's not for me. But if it is for them, they've had a really beautiful supportive environment to come to terms with that.
I really like that concept, and I like the concept of inviting people in as opposed to coming out. That's a really nice way to think about it. Beth, what resources were available to you when you went through this period of sort of coming out, and was there anything in particular that was useful for you?
I didn't have all that many resources. I think queer communities nowadays are a lot more friendly towards non-binary people. So you can definitely look at your local queer communities, see if there's any spaces that you can go and just exist and meet other people who are going through the same thing as you. That's the main thing. You need to tap into this sense of community. Oftentimes you'll find that there are a lot of people in your social circle who are LGBT and you didn't even realize it. So look at your queer communities and find other people who are going through the same thing as you, and just start making those connections. Those are the best resources.
T, do you have anything to add to that? Any other resources that you found helpful around this time?
Well, when I first properly came out, I connected with a group in Melbourne called Y Gender, who are absolutely fantastic. They're a youth-led support network and advocacy group specifically for trans and gender diverse people. And it was exactly as Beth just said, being in that community of people who have really similar experiences and are going through the same thing. It helped me come to terms with it, but also it really knitted me in tightly with that community. And some of the friends that I made through Y Gender are still some of my really good friends to this day. I think in terms of the resources, I also, like Beth, I didn't have heaps of resources growing up. The closest I had was playing Mario Kart as a kid and not wanting to play as Mario, but also not wanting to play as Peach. So I was like, oh, I'm going to play as Yoshi, the little green dinosaur. That looks cool. And not realizing for years, decades, that I was like, oh, that's what was going on there. And it was purely because I didn't have the vocabulary to be able to explain how I was feeling. So the more discussion of these topics and normalizing that there's more than two genders out there, super, super powerful.
Great, thank you so much. That's a really interesting insight into what it's like for the children coming out. Now, Vanessa, it is a difficult time for kids, but it can also be really challenging for parents. How can parents support children who might be exploring their gender identity?
Yeah, so parents can support their child by, as T mentioned, supporting the child with going by their preferred pronoun. Using their preferred name, whether it's for the weekend or for a longer period than that. Affirming the child's identity through what they wear, what things they're interested in. Maybe even helping the child with speaking to extended family. As I've noticed that from the work I do, kids have enough trouble coming out to their immediate family and then having to explain to the extended family. It's a lot of work. And if parents aren't sure, they have more information, they want more information, seek support. There's a lot of resources out there for parents now. Parents can also support their child by encouraging them to go see a mental health professional. And that is not because I'm stating that it's a disorder, because I definitely don't think that, but just because the mental health professional who is linked with the youth service will have a lot of resources out there.
Right, so you've touched on these resources. Are there any resources in particular that parents and children can use that's widely available?
There's quite a few online at the moment. As T mentioned, there's Y Gender, there's -18, there's Rainbow Network. I know that if you look at the Royal Children's website.
There's also a really fantastic resource that was created by the people at Y Gender and a few other organisations as well, called Trans 101. Their website is trans101.org.au. And they have videos that really simply explain the concepts, but also kind of like PDF cheat sheets that you can download and catch yourself up with what it means and what it means for both the person who's transitioning and also the people around them. So very much vouch for that resource. Really easy to read and really easy to access.
So Beth and T, I'm just curious, if there are parents who may be wondering whether their child is going through some sort of gender exploration, what would you recommend for them? What would be best for the child?
I would probably recommend waiting for the child to come out to the parents and not trying to force coming out, because it really should be something that the child has the ultimate agency with and control over. And it is something that they may be exploring. They may just not be even thinking about that. You can look into resources and be prepared for if that eventuality does happen, but I wouldn't broach the topic with your child. I'd wait for the child to reach out to you.
Yeah, I've had parents come to me knowing that I'm trans and be like, my daughter likes playing with trucks and she likes playing footy. Does that mean she's going to be a boy? And the answer is, unless she tells you, she might just really like playing footy. There are female footballers who are really excellent at what they do. So unless they come to you to tell you specifically, they might just have different interests to other girls or other boys.
Fantastic. That was so insightful. Thank you all so much for sharing your experience and your expertise, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap for today's show and for this series. Thank you so much for joining me for these episodes. If you'd like to watch today's segments or any from the previous episodes, please head to the Channel 31 YouTube page. I've had a really fun time getting this information out to you, and I hope to see you again soon.